Hey guys, so for this week's project, my partner and I decided to make a video about the Constitutional Convention. So let's get started.
Who were the farmers?
There were James Madison, Gouverneur Morris, Alexander Hamilton, and George Washington. James Madison was the co-author of the Articles of Confederation. Gouverneur Morris was a lawyer who favored a strong central government, and George Washington was the successful leader of the Continental Army. Some leaders who were not framers were Patrick Henry, who said he smelt a rat and refused to attend, Samuel Adams and John Hancock, who were not selected as delegates by their states. Thomas Jefferson and Thomas Paine were in Paris, and John Adams was on diplomatic missions to England and Holland. So how was the convention organized? And can you give us some more detail on the positions, press, and purpose of the convention?
Okay, so the meeting was held in secret. There were no press allowed, and they pledged to keep deliberations secret. The president at the time was George Washington, and the secretary was James Madison. The purpose was to revise the Articles of Confederation. Okay, can you describe for me the Virginia Plan and the organization and the powers of that plan?
Okay, so the Virginia Plan was introduced in the beginning of the Constitutional Convention in the summer of 1787, calling for three branches of government: the executive, judicial, and legislative branch. The legislative branch had two houses. The first one was elected by the people, and the second one was chosen by the first house from among the nominated by state legislatures. The executive branch was chosen by the national legislature as well as members of the national judiciary. The executive and some members of the judiciary branch were to constitute a council of revision that could veto acts of the legislature, which then could be overridden by the legislature. The national legislature had supreme powers in all matters on which states were not competent to act, as well as powers to veto state laws, and at least one house of the legislature would be elected directly by the people. The Virginia Plan was called the Randolph Plan or Big States Plan by people and were favored by large states. It was proposed by James Madison while waiting for quorum to meet in the convention to set the agenda and the discussion for the convention. It changed the purpose of the Constitutional Convention from actually revising the Articles of Confederation to create a brand new written document of the Constitution. What was the New Jersey Plan?
So this plan was introduced by William Paterson. In this plan, each state had one vote. Small states worried about representation in the Virginia Plan and being always outvoted by larger states. It revised the Articles of Confederation, gained authority to raise funds via tariffs. Congress had authority to collect taxes from states based on the number of free inhabitants and 3/5 of slaves. Stronger national government was created by this plan. What was the Connecticut Compromise?
The Connecticut Compromise, it saw the issues and problems with the Virginia Plan and the New Jersey Plan. It is also called the Great Compromise. Some think that Ben Franklin played a key role. By a 5-4 vote with 2 no votes, it passed. The House of Representatives, initially having 65 members, apportioned among the states on the basis of population elected by the people. So the House of Representatives would be elected by the people, and then the first House would have 65 members. A Senate consisted of 2 senators from each state to be chosen by the state legislatures. Much later, after the amendment, did we vote by popular vote for the senators. This compromise, the reconciled interests of both large and small states to ensure support for a strong central government from both small and large states. James Madison opposed the measures, but those that opposed finally accepted the idea. The Connecticut Compromise helped create a spirit of accommodation to tackle other issues. What was the Three-Fifths Compromise?
Each slave was to be counted as 3/5 of a person for representation, so it helped southern states, but not as much as a full person would have. Can you tell me about commerce and slave trade?
The slave trade and the Commerce Clause were two separate clauses, but they were also compromises during the Constitutional Convention. More compromises generated to create the Constitution. The Congress could not act on the slave trade for 20 years or until the year 1808. Congress passed and President Jefferson signed the bill to abolish the slave trade on January 1st, 1808. South Carolina in 1807 was the last state that abolished the slave trade. Congress was forbidden to tax exports leaving the U.S. or between states. This was the Commerce Clause, and Congress could regulate interstate trade, which was not a power that was given to the national government in the Articles of Confederation. What's the presidential election?
Okay, so one of the most important parts of the presidential election is the Electoral College. This was established by the Founding Fathers in the Constitution as a compromise between election of the president by a vote in Congress and election of the president by a popular vote of qualified citizens. States choose electors. The number of electors is equal to the number of senators, which are 2, plus the number of representatives. The minimum number for each state is 3, and a candidate can also win by popular vote. Okay, can you tell me about ratification, anti-federalist, federalist, federalist papers, and anti-federalist papers?
Okay, so this is a long one. Ratification was to approve the Constitution. There were 9 states you needed 9 states out of the 13 to approve. This was against the Articles of Confederation rules, which required all 13 states to approve. The Federalists were for the Constitution, and the Anti-Federalists were against ratifying the Constitution. These were the 2 first political parties of the United States, and they fought over the Constitution. The Federalists feared that a strong central government would be distant from the people and used powers to absorb the functions that belonged to the states. They feared that Congress would tax heavily, the Supreme Court would overrule state courts, the president would head a large standing army, and they feared a lack of Bill of Rights, which all actually came true. Federalist papers were used to try to adopt the Constitution to convince people in New York to approve it. They were written by John Jay, James Madison, and Alexander Hamilton. It was published in the New York newspapers. They had a pen name, which was the Publius. There were 85 articles that were written. Hamilton wrote 51. Madison wrote 26 of them. Jay wrote 5, and 3 co-authored, which was by Hamilton and Madison. The Federalist Papers had 10 and 50. The Federalist Papers 10 and 51 were the most famous and were written by Madison, which he stated that a well-constructed union can break and control the violence of a faction. He also wrote, "If men were angels, no government would be needed." Anti-Federalists wrote that their own papers in response to the ratification to try to get it to not be approved. There were not one book or one newspaper. The articles were George Clinton, Richard Henry Lee, Samuel Bryan, Robert Yachts, and others. They had pen names like Brutus or Cato and Sentinel. By June 21st, 1788, the ninth state ratified the Constitution, but it did not include Virginia or New York, which were the two largest states. And finally, by spring of 1790, all 13 states ratified the Constitution.